So here we have Richard Kane. Yes, we want to know how you met John Imber.
Okay, well, John was one of the great painters in Maine, and that's where I've been living since 1998. Started summering in 1990, and I started a series of films called Maine Masters about great Maine artists, but artists who are exceptional, but they don't have the recognition that they deserve.
Yeah.
So John was on that list of people who, the organization through which I produce these films is called the Union of Maine Visual Artists. So John was on that list, and we have a group called the Maine Masters Committee. And so I was walking into a gallery in Portland, Green Hut Galleries, owned by my friend Peggy Golden. And Peggy said, "Have you ever seen John Imber's work?" I said, "No, I haven't, but I've seen it in books, but I haven't seen it, live in front of me." So she said, "Well, we happen to have an exhibit here in the back gallery." So we went into the exhibit, and his work just knocked me out. It was the scale was so huge, like 5 feet by 6 feet. Some of the paintings, the brush strokes were so textured, and the colors were so vibrant. It was beautiful. It was better than de Kooning, from my perspective, but in that kind of genre, abstract expressionist, although based on landscape. That group of paintings that she had, and then she said to me, "Did you know that he was just diagnosed with ALS?" And I said, "I had no idea. And I didn't know whether ALS was, curable." So, and she said she doesn't think it is. So I immediately went into action, and I called up my collaborator, Rob Shetterly, and he's the president of the Union of Maine Visual Artists and part of that Maine Masters Committee. And I said, we really need to move ahead very quickly on this project if it's going to be done. So the committee immediately said, you got to move ahead with it. And so I contacted John and Jill, and they both were right behind it. And they gave me the names of many of John's collectors and friends and family, and I created a proposal, and that was like in the late summer of 2012. And by November, we had the money that we needed to make the film, and December, Rob Shetterly and I were in John's studio in Somerville, Mass. It's really, it's a story of his courageous and sometimes really darkly humorous response to this death sentence. And it touches a really deep chord within me and each one of us about our own mortality. Right. What do you do when you're given a death sentence? And how do you make the rest of your days meaningful and even fulfilling? And John was, I think that he really came alive.
Yes.
Through the making of the film, in a way. It's like, there was one of our writers, a guy named Carl Little, said it, a testament to the life-giving force that is art. Because John really lived, through his art. And even when he was diagnosed with this mortal disease, he was alive because of his art. And that's what I loved about John. And John and I became, very, very close. I don't usually greet my subjects with a hug and a kiss, but with John, every time I saw him, he was my brother. And in fact, we've learned after the film began that he was actually born in the same town that I grew up in from age 3, and he lived in the town right next door to me. Nice. His bio says that he was born in Baldwin, New York. Yep. And I said, "John, where were you born? There's no hospital in Baldwin, New York." And he says, "I was born in the South Nassau Community Hospital." And I said, "John, that's in Oceanside. That's where I grew up." So we became very, very close friends, and our family history was very much the same. His grandparents were Russian Jewish. My grandparents are Russian Jewish.
Really?
His mother played the piano. My mother played the piano. His father taught him to play golf. My father taught me to play golf.
Very similar backgrounds.
His sister was a dancer. His older sister was a dancer. My older sister was a dancer. It was like this parallel existence.
Right.
So John and I were very close, and I miss him greatly. I was just talking about him with some friends today at the winter market, and how he created a community around him. He wasn't particularly extroverted before his illness, but once he got his illness,
You never know it in the video, in the film. You never know that in the film. He's so outgoing in the film.
right. It's interesting, I guess we don't really know how we're going to be at the end of our lives.
Right.
We never know how we're going to respond to a terminal illness.
Right.
With John, he turned from being an introvert to an extrovert. It was as if he was looking for a community. And anytime anyone came into his studio, particularly in Stonington, Stonington, Maine, which is a beautiful fishing village, he would say, "Hey, why don't you sit down and I'll paint your portrait." And people did, and over a 3-month period of that summer of 2013, he painted over 100 portraits. So anybody who came to his door, and many people would come with pots of soup and bread, and a massage therapist would come and massage his hands, and he would say, "Come sit down and we'll make a portrait." And it was such a wonderful experience. It was so full of fun and life and jokes, and he never allowed anyone to be walking around on eggshells. He was very open and welcoming to anyone. I can talk a little bit about his black humor if you'd like, or unless you have a
Well, I
question.
just wanted to give the people a little bit of a background. He thought he had carpal tunnel, and then he was diagnosed.
I can't hear your
obviously.
question, Bernadette.
Okay. In October of 2000, I'm sorry, he was when was he when did he first get, when was he first diagnosed?
He was diagnosed in the summer of 2012.
Okay, yeah.
2012. And he thought, prior to that, he thought there was something going on with his maybe carpal tunnel syndrome. He was having trouble with his right hand.
Yeah.
And then in August, he was diagnosed with ALS, and his right hand and the muscles began deteriorating.
Right.
It's an awful disease where the motor neurons begin to die off, and the signal from the nervous system to the muscles die,
Right.
and you lose control of your hands and your throat. Eventually, you can't swallow. You have trouble speaking, and then you die. It's
Very scary disease.
not being able to breathe. It really is, and
But your brain still stays intact, right, the whole time?
exactly, and that's the cruelest part of it.
Yeah.
It's like you're watching your body fall apart around you. But John, he kind of took it in a way as an opportunity to be challenged. He always with his painting, he needed to be challenged. He didn't like anything that was glib, that was pretty. And he would, if you see the film, he would turn his paintings upside down or sideways if they started looking too glib.
I saw that, and it gave it a whole new different perspective.
It did, didn't it?
Yes.
It's like, you look at it upside down, and it's a different painting.
Right.
And Jill liked to talk about, well, how she would look at his paintings and realize that, he'd gone through so many iterations of a painting. There might be 40 different paintings in this one painting. And So he always wanted and needed to be challenged, and perhaps that's the way he looked at his ALS, that it was a challenge, and he was going to do everything he could to live a fulfilling and meaningful life. And he really did, and I think that he gave so much to his community with that message.
Right.
That every moment is important. And, why do I want to fool around with something, just to make a better living? I should. So personally, I really took his message as one that I need to proceed with making the films that I really want to make. And regardless of whether or not they're going to be, financially successful or what. And
staying true to your own voice or your own person is one of the hardest things to do in the world.
Right. And now, years ago, I made a film with my partner Melody about a woman named Mary Caroline Richards, MC Richards. And that was her message. She was a potter and a painter and a poet, probably best known for her writings.
Really?
She wrote a book called Centering in Pottery, Poetry, and the Person. She was at Black Mountain College, which has an extraordinary history. It attracted some of the most extraordinary artists of the last half of the 20th century. Robert Rauschenberg and Jacob Lawrence and Willem de Kooning and John Cage and Merce Cunningham, and just, it becomes an exercise in name dropping. But MC never believed in doing any kind of artwork for the marketplace. A lot of artists, I think, try to figure out, well, what does the marketplace want now? How am I going to be able to make a living and sell my work?
Right.
And she had a totally different philosophy. And her philosophy was you make art from your soul, from your heart.
That's right.
She wouldn't trust words like heart, but because she was a linguist but she believed that if you make art from the deepest part of your existence, then that art will find its way into other people's heart and soul. So that's what I learned from John. And
right. In your film, because he lost the use of his right hand, he uses his left hand to paint.
Right.
And he said, well,
Right.
frig it, if I can't use my right hand, then I'm going to use my left hand. And then even in the end, he used both hands and put the paintbrush in the middle, in between his both hands, and he looks into the camera and he's laughing. He's like, isn't this a hell of a way to paint, he said. But he was
Right.
laughing and he was happy.
right.
You know what I mean? Through it all,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
was phenomenal. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
He's
I
like,
think the
hell
word
with
he
it. If I
used was-
can't do what I love, then you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was wonderful about
I think the
that.
word he used was ridiculous. Isn't this the most ridiculous way of painting?
Right.
And the man he was painting, Don Ryman, who's still with us at 95, I think.
Wow.
And Don said, no, I don't think it's ridiculous at all.
So John taught figure drawing at Harvard in 1986, and he went to graduate school in Boston University,
Right.
where he met his mentor, Philip Guston, his professor. What's that?
Philip Guston was a huge influence on John. He was
His mentor.
in the film, somebody called him a giant of a figure. And he was large and imposing, and one of the great abstract expressionists of our time.
He was a teacher at Boston University, right?
Right. He was teaching at BU, where John went to graduate school.
Right.
And Guston had different kind of parts of his life where he was an abstract expressionist, and then he turned to figurative work. And it's a very interesting kind of history that Guston went through. But John was influenced early by Guston's figurative work, and always looking for a meaning for his work. It's not simply the beauty of abstraction, but it was a story that Guston would tell with his art. And John mimics Guston, saying that, I don't think that, I don't want to see any light falling on buildings anymore, when you can, paint images of, deep stories. Slightly different wording, but I think you get the picture.
Right.
But Guston was a big influence on John, and John, early in his career, painted a lot of figurative work and wonderful titles, too. There was one of a character reading the newspaper, and the title is Bad News. And that was a little bit too prescient,
Right.
for John receiving bad.
I think his figure paintings were beautiful. There was something about them that was just phenomenal. I think they were like crystal clear, and they had the most beautifulest specks of the skin color on the people were brilliant. You know what I mean? It was like there was a light in there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There was a wonderful portrait, a self-portrait that John did that was in the film. Matter of fact, it's the very first painting that you see of John's, the very opening scene, where he and Jill carry this painting to where he does his work. And in that painting, shortly thereafter, you see in the gallery in Boston, Alpha Gallery, and the facial tones were just so multicolored.
Exactly.
A lot of people kind of compare him with Alice Neal, who's a painter of nudes. But it's a very interesting use of color. I think I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think is the most important part of the film and the place in the film where there's like a turning point. And that, I think, is when John and Jill move back to Deer Isle from Stonington. This is like going back to the last summer that John will be alive. And he thinks and talks about being a parent, and whether or not being a parent was more important than being a painter. Being a success, he says, being a successful parent feels more fulfilling, feels ultimately the best thing that I could do. But he says he's going to keep on painting, and that's where his persistence comes in. He's going to keep on painting because that's what he does. It gives him pleasure. But he says that I don't necessarily think that was what my life was all about. I'm a painter, but I'm also a husband, a father, and a friend. My life like that really felt very full, gratifying, and I don't know if I need to paint to be who I am. Well, when I told Jill what John had said, she said, "That's bull." Beep. And because she believed that through and through, John was a painter, and that's where he got his identity. But at the same time, when you're approaching the last days of your life, you think about, well, was that really important? What was important? What are the most important things? What have been the most important things in my life? And shortly thereafter, we have a scene where John is painting in that studio where all that hysteria and fun takes place. And Gabe, his 18-year-old son, walks in because Gabe decided to spend the summer with his parents instead of, with his college friends. Right. And so he comes into the studio. Gabe comes into the studio, and John has 3 portraits out. And by this time, John had switched from painting with his right hand to painting with his left hand. Right. Where the title comes from. And because his right hand, the muscles gave out. And then after painting with his left hand for a while, he had to paint with both hands, like this. And you see that in the film. so his work takes on a very different kind of authenticity that John, in a way, really loved. But Gabe says, well, it's okay. It's got a weird perspective. He says, I don't love it.
Right.
And so, some people's looking at that, because I cut the film together with that scene in it. And some people, and then Gabe goes on to say, nobody else is going to tell you the truth, but, I'm going to tell you the truth.
Right.
I don't love it. Everybody's going to say, that's great, John, wonderful, John. But, it's really just okay. So a number of people who I consult with felt that that was too harsh.
I mean, it's a typical kid, the typical kids, you know what I'm saying? The teenagers.
Well, no, I don't think Gabe was being typical by being honest. And I think that's the point, that he was taught to be honest by his parents, that he can tell them anything. And that's why I first I took it out of the film to see how it was like, what it felt like without that. And, but I had already sent it the film had already been accepted to the Independent Film Festival Boston, IFFB. And I had sent a copy of the film with that scene in it of Gabe criticizing the paintings. And then after sending a copy of it to the Boston Globe, hoping to get a review, I took it out of the film just to see what it felt like. And then I was told that the article, that the review in the Boston Globe was on the front page. So my wife and I got a copy of the Globe, and we were looking all over for like the theater section, entertainment section, the arts, and we couldn't find it. And then my wife Melody said, I think it's actually on the real front page. So we got the article, and I read the article by Sebastian Smee, their art critic, and he said that it was that scene where Gabe says that he doesn't love it, that really made the film the powerful film that it is. And so I had to go back and put that scene back into it before it was shown at the Independent Film Festival Boston.
Nice save. Yeah, and my take on it is, I think it was like, yes, work is awesome, do what makes you happy, you know what I'm saying? But, it's time to put the paintbrush down, and you know what I mean? Let's spend time together. In other words, you're the important one, Dad. It's you. It's not your painting, it's you. And when he was walking off, he put his arm around his father, and it was very touching, very touching.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, work is wonderful, but work has its place. You know what I mean? It's relationships that matter. You know what I mean? And the love between them. You know what I mean? That's why Jill
was having trouble with John, wondering about what's the most important thing, what gives me my identity as John Imber. And Jill felt, because she had lived with him for 22 years, that it was painting that gave him his identity. But here he was going through a transition. Is that the most important thing in my life?
Right.
Well, it clearly was maybe the most important thing in his life, but so was his relationship with Gabe, and so was his relationship with Jill.
Exactly.
And his whole community, which becomes so important towards the end of the film when we see John painting, over 100 portraits of members of his community, who he did love.
Right.
So I think it's a deeply felt film about someone's struggle with finding meaning in their life. Right. So I don't think it's necessarily a film about art or a film about meaning or philosophy or the history of painting, but it's all those things. Everybody, at some point in their life, comes to the point where they say, what makes my life meaningful? What gives me the power to, do what I think is most important? And unfortunately for John, it was his terminal illness.
Right.
Hopefully, John and the message that he brings to us will give each one of us the courage to do what's most important.
Exactly. And his wife Jill in all of this was phenomenal as well. She was, such a
Absolutely.
supporter, you know what I mean? And also
Sure.
an artist herself. Her paintings are beautiful as well. Her paintings are also in the film.
Right, right. And Jill's a very strong and beautiful woman, and they had a very, very special relationship. And
Yeah, you can see that as well in the film. You know what I mean? It shows.
but relationships, they have their ebb and flow. All relationships do.
True.
And I mean, some people ask me, well, did John ever, get depressed? Because, you don't see it in the film.
That's
And
true.
I kept on looking for that, and kept on, kept rolling the camera and hoping to find myself in a situation where he kind of expressed that, the dark side. And really, the only place he expressed the dark side was with his dark humor, which was, it disarmed you, and you can only
Exactly.
laugh and hug him. Nobody would want to have a disease. How do you say this? Nobody would ever want to have a disease like what I have. I can't remember exactly how he said it, but there was one scene.
Yeah,
What's
it was just phenomenal that he had such a sense of humor. He chose to accept it, and he chose to even make fun of it.
Right.
Is an example to us all about courage. I mean, we
Right.
don't even do that even without a disease. Do you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, sure.
It's phenomenal, and you can see that. You know what I'm saying? I thought his sense of humor, like you said, it was dark, but it was funny. You know what I'm saying? It
Yeah.
was just an example to all of us, for sure.
Yeah, it was interesting how John looked at his, painting with his left hand, and how he found, looking back on when he was well, how his right hand was so glib and pretty. And he found that the spontaneity and in his left hand was so authentic. It's interesting how he found something really positive about that left hand, those mistakes that you don't get when you're painting with the hand that you trained for 40 years, but you have those mistakes with your untrained hand that for him was just really authentic, was real. So he found meaning in that,
Right.
in that too.
There was a freedom in his using his left hand.
Yeah.
He didn't have to worry about, you know what I mean, making mistakes, or you know what I mean. It was a
Yeah.
freedom, but he did it anyway. He painted anyway, and they
Yeah.
still came out great.
And he laughed at himself. I mean, the very last scene where he's looking at the painting, the portrait that he was just making, and he kind of chuckled, at it, like it's so kind of crazy, ridiculous, wonderful, funny. And it's interesting how he often painted, Jill and he painted side by side.
You see that in the film, yes, off and on.
Yeah,
Yep.
in at least a couple of places. So it's a wonderful film that I hope that people get to see. You can go to mainmasters.com, and you can click on Imber's Left Hand. It's been through the festival circuit, and it was very, very well received, having won at 4 festivals. It won the best film of the festival.
Wow.
So
Congratulations. That's
It's
an
been-
awesome achievement. Well, we look forward to seeing
Thank you.
more of you, and we look forward to hearing all about Ashley Ryan and your film.
Thank you.
And we'll see you around at the film festival. And I just want to remind everybody that the Arlington International Film Festival, again, has opened up its doors it's now accepting documentaries and film, and it will be coming up in October of this year.
Okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience, Bernadette. I wish you luck with the blog and the series.
All right, thank you very much. You
Thanks
have a
so
great
much.
weekend, Richard.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.